A village in the mountains has been suffering constant attacks from an S-rank Fenrir, so they spent all of their savings to hire an SS-rank party to defeat it. The members of Flaming Dragon Fang are some of the strongest adventurers in the world, each with their own unique strengths. But then there's Kurt, and all he's good for is doing chores, so he's hiding behind a wall to avoid getting hurt. However, Kurt is the first person the Fenrir attacks once it arrives, and he is sent flying. The other members of the party get ready for combat. Galnova orders Bandana to restrain the Fenrir, so she pulls out her wire and ties it up. But a second later, the Fenrir breaks her back against the wall. Normally, Bandana would be confined to a wheelchair for the rest of her life, but with Malphus on the team, she's healed within seconds and gets back to work. She uses a tree to anchor herself to the ground, giving Galnova an opening to aim for the Fenrir's head. He jumps up and sets it ablaze with his magic sword. The villagers are so happy about the Fenrir's defeat that they prepare a feast for the party, even though the village is almost broke. But Galnova absolutely hates this peasant food. He orders Kurt to prepare a decent meal for him instead, and Bandana asks him to make something special because today is the last day they are going to get to eat Kurt's cooking. Kurt doesn't understand what they mean by that, so he asks Galnova for an explanation, and he tells Kurt that, as of today, he is being fired. Kurt doesn't understand why they are firing him, so he asks Galnova if he did something wrong, but Galnova says the problem is that Kurt isn't doing enough. Sure, he handles the party's chores for them, but aside from that, he is completely useless in combat, and parties are only allowed to have 4 members. So if they want their party to become stronger, they need to replace Kurt with a powerful mage or at least someone who can handle themselves in a fight. Kurt pleads with them to let him stay in the party, but Galnova kicks him in the stomach because he is sick of listening to Kurt's whining. They don't need him anymore, and that's final. The next day, Kurt leaves the village on his own, with nowhere to go and a wallet emptier than the abyss. Kurt eventually arrives in the city of Samila, and he is down to his last few pennies, so he really needs to find a new job soon. He finds a temp work agency and decides to give it a shot. He walks in and is greeted by the receptionist. She asks him if he is here to hire someone or to look for a job, and after Kurt tells her he's here looking for work, she informs him that she will need to conduct an interview and aptitude test. First, she asks for basic details like his name, age, and hometown. So, he tells her his name is Kurt Rockhans, he's 15 years old, and he is from Hass village in the Sheen Mountains. Kirschel had no idea that there was a village up in those mountains, but moving on, she asks him what his work history was like. Kurt tells her that he was a part of Flaming Dragon Fang, but all he ever did for them was basic chores, and he was recently fired. Kirschel is surprised to hear that Kurt was part of the S-rank party, and even if he didn't do much for them, having the party's name on his application will definitely help him find a new job. Kurt is glad to hear that, and now all he needs to do is complete the aptitude test so Kirschel can figure out what his strengths and weaknesses are. Aptitudes in this world are gifts granted by God, and if Kurt is lucky, he might discover a hidden talent today. Aptitudes are graded from G rank all the way up to SSS rank, and the difference between aptitude ranks is so great that someone with a G-rank sword skill would barely be able to swing a sword, while someone with an A-rank sword skill could effortlessly split a rock in half. Kurt is excited to find out if he has a talent, but unfortunately, every single combat aptitude on his sheet is rated G-rank, so he has no hope of ever taking on a combat role. Kurt immediately loses all hope, but Kirschel tells him there's still a chance that he might have a good trade skill, like alchemy or blacksmithing. Although, the technician who handles those aptitude tests is currently on vacation, so Kurt will have to come back next week to be evaluated. Kurt tells her he won't last that long because he's one loaf of bread away from being penniless, so he really needs to find a job today. Kirschel understands Kurt's situation, so she asks him to try lifting one of those sandbags over there. Kurt gives it a shot, and as he puts his hands on the bag, he gets a strange sensation, almost like the sand drained a bit of his mana. Anyway, he lifts the bag, and since he is strong enough to do that, Kirschel thinks he should be able to handle construction work. She tells him that the Margraviate of Tycone is currently recruiting workers to help repair the city walls, so Kurt should be able to get a job there if she writes a letter of recommendation for him. Kurt is grateful for her help, so he immediately heads out to meet the Margrave. The Margrave sees the letter saying that Kurt wants to work here, but he honestly doesn't think Kurt looks like he can handle construction work. But then again, he needs all the hands he can get, so he decides to give Kurt a chance. He tells him to mix up some cement and use it to repair the wall, and his pay will be determined by how much work he puts in. The Margrave will be back to check on Kurt's progress later, and he tells him that he had better get to work soon because if he hasn't used at least half a barrel of cement by the time the Margrave is back, his pay is going to be low. Kurt wants to ask a question because the Margrave never mentioned anything about pouring mana into the cement to strengthen it, but he decides to stay quiet because it's probably common knowledge. Still, he's surprised that the quota is only half a barrel of cement because that seems way too easy. So, Kurt decides to use as much cement as he can before the Margrave returns. By the time the Margrave is back, he is shocked to see that Kurt has already finished an entire section of the wall. Kurt apologizes to him because he could have done more, but he ran out of cement halfway through. The Margrave is still having a hard time believing that Kurt really repaired over a third of the huge western wall, so he asks Kurt how he managed to repair the top of the wall. Kurt explains that he just threw the cement up there and used a stick to smooth it out. Normally, the Margrave would call Kurt a liar because that sounds impossible. But Kurt clearly managed to make it work, so he has to be telling the truth. He asks Kurt how long he plans to work here, and Kurt says he just needs the job for a week. The Margrave is glad to hear that. He tells Kurt that he has done enough work for today, so he can go home now. He doesn't have enough money on him to pay Kurt for all the work he did, so he hands him a small pouch of money and promises to send him the rest through the temp agency. Kurt is amazed because even the small pouch has more money in it than he ever could have made when he was working for the hero party. Over the next few days, Kurt continues to work hard on repairing the wall, but all of a sudden, the Margrave tells him he is being fired. Kurt asks why, so the Margrave explains that the wall repairs were supposed to provide work for people in poverty, but Kurt is way too efficient. So if he keeps working here, there will be no work left for anyone else. He isn't mad at Kurt or anything, but from what he has seen, Kurt's ability is at least SS rank, if not SSS rank, so he would be better off working in the royal capital or something. He gives Kurt a lump sum payment as compensation for being fired so suddenly and walks off, but Kurt completely misunderstands the situation and thinks the Margrave just wanted to get rid of him for being a terrible worker. He heads back to the temp agency and meets with Kirschel to tell her he got fired and it's still going to take a few days before Kurt can have his trade attributes appraised. Just then, they hear a commotion over at the front desk, and it looks like a girl is trying to set up a recruitment ad. But the receptionist at the desk tells her that no one would agree to work under such terrible conditions with what she's offering. Even so, the girl keeps insisting that the receptionist should try to find someone, and she's starting to cause a disturbance, so Kirschel goes over to see what the problem is. Kirschel's coworker tells her that this girl wants to recruit a miner to excavate a mountain that hasn't been explored, but she is refusing to offer an upfront payment, and insists on paying only if the excavation is successful. Kirschel agrees that no one in their right mind would ever agree to those terms, so she tries to convince the girl to hire investors to develop the mine. But the girl says she can't do that because if she doesn't pay the taxes by the end of the week, they'll impound her mine. Just then, Kurt walks up and says he is crazy enough to take a job like that. After all, back in his village he used to help with the mine excavation, so he has a decent amount of experience. Kirschel asks Kurt if he is sure he wants to accept, because with the contract the girl is offering, it is entirely possible that he won't get paid at all. Before Kurt can respond, the girl cuts him off and says she was actually hoping to hire a brownie dwarf, not a helpless-looking boy, so she would feel bad making Kurt do it. However, any dwarf would require an upfront payment of at least 10 silver, and the girl doesn't have that much money to spare, so she decides to take Kurt after all. As Kurt and the girl leave, Kirschel feels bad for letting him take that job because it probably isn't worth the time. Honestly, she thinks Kurt would be better off working in a brothel because she would pay a lot of money to spend the night with him. While she's daydreaming about Kurt, her coworker gets her attention and tells her that a bank transfer just came through. Apparently, it's the remaining money the Margrave promised to send to compensate for all the work Kurt did on the wall. Kirschel was expecting it to be something like 50 silver, but it's actually a check for 200 gold, and that's a lot of money. She is so shocked Kurt was actually able to make that much money that she accidentally stumbles over the sandbags on the floor. Her coworker comes over and tells her to be careful with those because they aren't regular sandbags. They are actually used to measure the amount of mana a person possesses, and they are supposed to get heavier when someone with a large mana reserve touches them. They usually don't react with regular people, so Kirschel is able to pick it up fairly easily, but she remembers seeing Kurt struggle a lot when he picked it up a few days ago, so she's starting to wonder if he really is just a normal kid. Meanwhile, Kurt and Ulysses are walking into the forest to get to her campsite, but when they get there, Kurt is a little concerned because there's only one tent. Ulysses says the tent is big enough for the two of them to sleep together, but Kurt says he'd never be able to go to sleep if he's lying next to a cute girl like her. After hearing Kurt call her cute, Ulysses gets upset because she thinks he's just trying to flatter her, but Kurt says he really does think that Ulysses is cute. Ulysses realizes Kurt genuinely meant it, so she lets go and hands him a potato for dinner. It's just a basic boiled potato, but it has been so long since anyone has cooked for Kurt, so he really appreciates it. He is also grateful for the fact that Ulysses is sitting with him to eat because Galnova and the others from the hero party always refuse to let Kurt eat in the same room as them. Later that night, Kurt and Ulysses go to bed, but Kurt is having a hard time sleeping because Ulysses went to bed in her underwear. He will never be able to go to sleep with stiff wood, so he decides to leave the tent for the night and sleep outside. Once Kurt leaves the tent, Ulysses opens her eyes because she was just pretending to fall asleep. She intentionally went to bed in her underwear to see if Kurt was the kind of person to assault her in her sleep, but now, she knows he's a good guy. The next morning, Ulysses wakes up and leaves the tent. She finds Kurt sleeping over by a tree, and she feels a little bad about making him sleep out here, but then she notices that her jacket is fixed. Kurt soon wakes up, so she asks him if he's the one who repaired her jacket, and he confirms it. She's impressed that he has so much talent for sewing, and she's starting to wonder if he is really going to be good at mining, but it's too late to find someone else, so they'd better get to work. Kurt asks Ulysses if she has decided on a location to begin mining yet, but she was just going to dig in random locations and pray to find some valuable ores. Kurt tells her she'll never find anything if she searches like that, and he happens to know a much more efficient way. He takes Ulysses to a section of the mountain, and after looking around for a bit, he finds a rock full of gemstones. Ulysses is shocked that he found it so easily, but in a matter of minutes, Kurt has located every single gemstone in this section of the mountain. Ulysses can hardly believe it because if she sells all of these gems, she'll be able to pay off her debt, but Kurt tells her she can't sell them. Ulysses realizes he's right, since Kurt was the one who found all of them, so he gets to keep the money. That's not what he meant. He was just trying to tell her that the gems will be more valuable if he turns them into magic crystals first. Kurt was right about that, but Ulysses says there are only 10 mages in the entire kingdom who are skilled enough to turn gems into magic crystals. But while she was saying all that, Kurt just finished turning a gem into a magic crystal. Ulysses is too stunned to speak because not only did Kurt create a magic crystal, but he did it instantly, when even the most experienced mages spend at least an hour to make a single magic crystal. After Kurt finishes turning all the gems into crystals, he agrees to let Ulysses go sell them, so she heads out while he stays behind on the mountain because he has a few things he wants to finish doing first. Ulysses heads to the city's customs agency and tells them that she wants to sell some magic crystals in the royal capital, but magic crystals are incredibly valuable, so the agent asks her where she got these. There's no way he would believe her if she told him that some random boy created them, so she flashes her royal family emblem to get him to stop asking questions. This is kind of a bluff since she stopped working for the royal family a while ago and they just forgot to take her emblem away, but it does the trick, so the customs agent allows her to use the teleportation circle to go to the capital. Once she's there, she heads to the shop of an old friend, and she tells Mimiko that she has some magic gems to sell. Mimiko takes a look at them, and at first, they don't seem like they'd be worth much, but upon closer inspection, she discovers that they have 10 times the normal amount of mana imbued in them, so these crystals are worth 10 gold each. Ulysses is at a loss for words because Kurt gave her 50 of these, so Mimiko casually hands her a bag of 500 gold coins. But before Ulysses leaves, Mimiko has 2 requests to make. First, she wants Ulysses to promise to only sell crystals like these at this shop because it would be a disaster if crystals that are this powerful were allowed to circulate without regulation, and secondly, she wants to know the name of the person who created the crystals. Ulysses agrees to the first condition, but she says she can't tell Mimiko the name of the crystal's creator because she'd have to ask him for permission first. Mimiko is a court mage for the royal family, so she tries using her position to order Ulysses to give up the mysterious mage's information, but Ulysses doesn't work for the royal family anymore, so she isn't obligated to obey Mimiko. Mimiko realizes she isn't going to be able to convince Ulysses to give up Kurt's information, so at least asks her to make sure he doesn't wander off to another nation. She also wants Ulysses to tell him that if he agrees to come work for the royal family, Mimiko is prepared to grant him the title of Count and full access to the Royal Research Lab and all its benefits. Ulysses then leaves Mimiko's shop, and the next morning, she returns to the mountain to meet up with Kurt, but she is shocked to find that Kurt built a whole house in the time she was gone. Setting that aside, Ulysses explains that a friend of hers wants to hire Kurt as a royal mage. If he accepts the position, he will be treated as a noble, so he'd be guaranteed a good salary with benefits no matter what. Kurt finds it hard to believe that he is really being offered such an impressive job, but Ulysses assures him that it is a genuine offer. She asks him what he wants to do, but Kurt says he's going to decline. Ulysses can't believe that Kurt would turn it down because anyone would jump at the chance to become a royal mage, and I'm just as shocked because Kurt's reason for turning it down is stupid. He thinks he doesn't deserve to be in a position that puts him above other people and he is still hoping to go back to being the Flaming Dragon's chore boy, even if he has to beg them to let him rejoin. Speaking of Flaming Dragon, they are getting their asses beaten by a tree monster. Galnova can't use his fire magic for some reason, so he asks Malphus to heal him. She has been trying to do that for a while now, but her healing magic isn't working like it usually does. Galnova asks the new guy to cast fire magic to take down the tree, but the new guy doesn't know how to use fire magic, and that's supposed to be Galnova's job anyway. The party's chemistry is completely gone without Kurt here to hold them together, and Bandana is the only one who can tell that the party is crumbling. Back to Kurt, his current job is still to help Ulysses mine gems here, and he tells her he found a good gem vein yesterday so he can get a lot more for her. Ulysses is grateful for his enthusiasm, but she is concerned that Kurt might be tired from all that he did yesterday. However, he tells her not to worry because he got 6 hours of sleep last night. Ulysses is shocked to hear that and starts doing some mental math to figure out how Kurt could have built an entire house and still manage to get 6 hours of sleep. But Kurt interprets this as Ulysses being mad that he slept too much, so he apologizes and says he will make up for his laziness. Ulysses really needs to explain Kurt's strength to him at some point, but she has no idea how to address it, so she and Kurt just head out to do more mining. Kurt leads Ulysses over to the spot he found, and although it looks like an ordinary forest section, Kurt tells her she should be able to find some good gems out here. Although, he warns her not to dig past 500 meters, as if that's something you can do accidentally. He then starts walking away, so Ulysses asks where he is going and Kurt explains that he is on his way to a different mining spot, and he will meet back up with her later. Ulysses spends all day digging and by evening time she has finally found a huge topaz gem. She deposited all the coins from the magic gems into Kurt's account because he was the one who found them. But since she found this one herself, she can use the profits to cover her taxes. She could probably even convince Kurt to turn this thing into a magic gem so she can get even more money. But she decides not to do that because she doesn't want to take advantage of Kurt's kindness. Speaking of Kurt, she decides to go see how he is doing, and from what she has seen him do so far, she knew he would go overboard. But she wasn't expecting him to have built an entire tunnel system within 8 hours. Kurt eventually comes out and he tells Yulicia that unfortunately he was only able to find a little bit of the gems that he was looking for. All the other stuff he found was just a bunch of useless rocks, and he plans on throwing them away once he is done here. Yulicia takes a look in the rock cart, and those rocks look a little too pretty to be worthless, so she asks him what they are. Kurt explains that those are mithril ores, but back in Kurt's village mithril was so common in the mines that they usually just threw it away whenever they found some. Yulicia has no words for what she just heard, and aside from wanting to know what kind of village Kurt came from, she asks him what gem he was looking for if he considers mithril as trash. Kurt pulls out a small rock and tells her he has been looking for orichalcum, but he only managed to find enough to fill a small box. Orichalcum is known as the metal of the gods, so even a gram of the stuff is worth millions, and Kurt just casually found a box of the stuff. Yulicia had no idea orichalcum could even be found in places like this. But Kurt tells her you can mine it anywhere, you just need to dig 8 kilometers into the ground to get to it. Yulicia decides that's enough mining for today, and since the topaz she found will cover her taxes, her contract with Kurt is over. That means Kurt has to start looking for another job because no one has told him about the mountain of gold in his bank account yet. While he's on his way to the agency, Kurt runs into Bandana and he's glad to see her, but he asks what she's doing here. Bandana tells him she isn't a part of Flaming Dragon anymore, but there's a little more to the story than that. After their disastrous mission, Galnova went to a 5-star restaurant to get some good food, but compared to Kurt's cooking, all the food here tastes like garbage. Galnova is enraged, so he smashes the place up and storms out without paying. As he walks into an alleyway, he meets Bandana and she tells him he went too far by destroying that restaurant. However, all Galnova cares about is getting good food, so he orders Bandana to go find Kurt and force him to come back, even if it means breaking his bones to do it. Galnova is clearly losing his mind here, so Bandana doesn't argue with him about it. She just snatched Galnova's teleportation crystal and runs out of the alley. As she leaves, she sees the city guards closing in on Galnova's location, and without his teleportation crystal, he is definitely going to be arrested for what he did at the restaurant. Additionally, Malphus was called away by the church, so the Flaming Dragon party is officially done for. Although she leaves out most of the details about Galnova going off the deep end. Kurt is disappointed to hear that Flaming Dragon has disbanded because that means he can't rejoin anymore, but Bandana doesn't understand why he would even want to go back in the first place. Kurt explains that he owes Galnova a lot, and he is still blissfully unaware of how much of a jerk Galnova was, so he is really sad that you won't be able to work with him anymore. Bandana, on the other hand, never really cared about Galnova since he was just a cover story so she could keep an eye on Kurt. Anyway, since Kurt was on his way to the agency, Bandana thinks it's safe to assume that he is looking for a job, and if that's the case, then she has the perfect thing for him. A friend of hers has been looking for someone to help in her workshop lately, and it should be a decent gig since this friend is an Atelier master. There are only a few Atelier masters in the world, and they are all incredibly important, so their influence is on par with that of a viscount. Bandana asks Kurt if he wants to accept the job, and he says he'd love to, so she hands him a map and sends him on his way. Eventually, Kurt makes it to the workshop of the Atelier master, but he is a little confused since this place looks like a regular house to him. He knocks on the door, and a little elf girl answers. At first, Kurt is a little shocked because he didn't expect the Atelier master to be such a little girl, but Michelle explains that she is actually the master's assistant. In that case, Kurt tells her he is here for a job, and Michelle is delighted to hear that because she needs all the help she can get. She leads Kurt into the kitchen, and as soon as he sets foot in there, he smells the stench of Davy Jones' locker. Michelle apologizes for how messy this place is, but the master has been working her non-stop, so she hasn't had a chance to really clean up yet. Just then, the master calls for Michelle, so she runs off and asks Kurt to help her clean up the kitchen. Kurt is a little disappointed since he thought he would get to assist the Atelier master, but chores are simple enough for him to do, so he gets to work. 30 minutes later, Kurt has cleaned the entire kitchen, and Michelle didn't really tell him what he is supposed to do next, so he starts wandering the halls looking for her. He finds a door in one of the corridors, so he knocks on it, and a girl inside tells him to come in. However, when Kurt enters, he sees the girl practically naked on her bed. He gets flustered, and apologizes for the intrusion. But she doesn't seem bothered by Kurt seeing her like this. Kurt explains that he is looking for Michelle, so the girl tells him that Michelle is down in the basement. Kurt is about to leave to find Michelle, but then he notices a dark mark on the girl's belly. He recognizes it as a curse, so he asks the girl if he can take a close look at it. She gives him permission, so Kurt goes up to her and starts feeling the cursed spot. Curses like this usually destroy the internal organs around the afflicted area, so it must be incredibly difficult for the girl to eat. But it turns out that her stomach is still intact, so Kurt offers to go make her some food. Meanwhile, Ulysses meets with Mimiko to discuss the mithril and orichalcum that Kurt found. Kurt didn't even turn them into magic crystals this time, and the value is still over 50,000 gold coins, so Ulysses is starting to get concerned. She asks Mimiko what she thinks will happen if people find out about Kurt's skill, and in the best case scenario, Kurt will be kidnapped and forced into slavery. Worst case, she gets assassinated for being too much of a threat. Mimiko asks Ulysses what she plans to do with Kurt, and so far, Ulysses has been thinking of setting him up to become an Atelier master. That way, you would have enough power that no one would be able to take advantage of him. And then she plans to work as his bodyguard, but getting Kurt to agree to all that is going to be difficult. He is too dense to realize how skilled he truly is, and worse yet, he undervalues himself constantly. So Ulysses needs to do something before Kurt gets himself in trouble. Meanwhile, Kurt has just finished cooking some porridge for the girl he met earlier, when all of a sudden, Michelle and the Atelier master Ophelia come out of the basement. They are both surprised to see that the kitchen isn't a biohazard anymore, and even more so that Kurt cleaned it up in such a short time. Ophelia notices that Kurt is cooking some porridge, so Kurt explains that the girl he met in one of the rooms said she was hungry. Ophelia seems a bit concerned that Kurt met that girl, so she makes him promise not to tell anyone about her. Kurt promises, so Ophelia tells him he can go home for the day and hands him 3 silver coins. Kurt is surprised that she is paying him so much for just cleaning the kitchen, but she says he deserves it for working so hard and asks him to come back tomorrow. A little while later, Ophelia heads to the girl's room with the porridge Kurt made for her, and she reminds her that she's not supposed to let other people see her. That aside, Kurt doesn't seem like a threat, so Ophelia doesn't think she'll have to worry about him leaking this secret. Lieselot still hasn't eaten yet, so Ophelia asks her to wait a minute while she tests the porridge for poison. However, Lieselot says there's no need for that. She only spoke to Kurt for a little while, but her intuition tells her that he's a good person. And besides, there would be no point in trying to poison her when the curse has already progressed this far. She has had to live her life suspecting everyone around her, so just this once, she wants to trust someone fully. Ophelia understands, so she lets her eat the porridge, but after Lieselot takes her first bite, she begins sweating profusely and falls over on the floor. Ophelia thinks Kurt must have really poisoned the food after all, so she's about to go on a manhunt to kill him, but all of a sudden, Lieselot gets back up and says she is fine. In fact, she feels better than ever because the curse has been broken. Ophelia has no idea how to process what just happened because a curse like that isn't easy to break. Yet, it was undoubtedly broken by the food Kurt cooked. At that same moment, the secret organization that placed the curse on Lieselot is having a meeting because they just found out that the curse was broken. They were hoping to use it to kill Lace from a safe distance, but now they are going to have to use more drastic measures. Later that evening, Ophelia and Lieselot head into Mimiko's shop because they have something urgent to discuss. Lieselot takes off her hood, and as soon as Mimiko and Ulysses see her face, they recognize her as the third princess of the nation. Ophelia explains that a powerful curse was placed on Lieselot in an attempt to assassinate her. They aren't sure who was behind it, but Lieselot is the only child between the king and Princess Françoise from the Gurumukha kingdom, so her existence is kind of like a symbol of peace between the two nations. And Samila is clearly trying to start a war. Mimiko is glad Lieselot is alright, but she is surprised that she managed to break such a powerful curse on her own. However, Lieselot tells her she didn't do it by herself. The curse was actually broken by a man named Kurt, and as soon as the two hear Kurt's name, they freak out.